Hi. Hi.
Hello. What's going on, everybody?
Design Leadership is a program to help you shape your abilities and skills to be an effective leader and helps you to take design higher up within the organization. You will learn through 12 global masterclasses taught by 12 globally renowned design leaders.
Throughout the last decades, we have been observing how service design is moving upwards.
And now more than ever, we need new tools and new leadership.
And 12 regional workshops where you will connect and network within your region, learn from local leaders, and practice your design leadership. Learn how design can create cultural change, how to shape better design teams, and how to lead delightful products and services. This program was designed to help you reach the next step and realms of your design leadership journey. Join from every region and learn from other design leaders globally and locally.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Design Leadership Program. This is America's Track Fire Session. My name is Reinaldo Campos, and I'll be hosting this meeting with you all and this wonderful talk that we're going to have in a few minutes. I am an ECHOS partner and a learning experience coordinator, and I'll be with you throughout the program, watching the sessions, helping with facilitation, and helping you have the best experience you can have in your life, right? So I love working with design thinking, empathy, collaboration, and experimentation, and I'm passionate about solving problems in a creative fashion. Together with me today, we
You might be muted, Reinaldo.
Thank you. Rewinding. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks for letting me know. So welcome you all to the program. My name is Reinaldo Campos. I'm an ECHOS partner and learning experience coordinator. I'll be with you throughout this talk, hosting this wonderful talk among brilliant designers. And with me is Nadine Foik. Nadine, if you'd like to introduce yourself and say hi, and then I'll hand over back to you.
Sure thing. Thank you, Reinaldo. And it is so exciting to be here with you all as you're joining this chat. I am sure you're as excited as I am for this panel and the conversations that are coming up. So I am Nadine. I'm the design director of Insights and Innovation. There is design and research baked into that, but just different terms. And I work with Desklight, which is a design consultancy, really focusing on learning and how to design learning experiences in a way that it could be transformative. So I am, as it says here, I'm a creative problem solver. I am a designer, but more in terms of really bringing together these critical conversations and making things happen from internally, from within an organization, but then also working with clients and really executing on whether it's a product, a service, or capacity building with a variety of organizations and individuals.
Great, thank you, Nadine. If you are joining us right now, you could tell us where you're speaking from and what kind of designer you are. So put it in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. At the end of this session, we're gonna have some moments for you to ask questions directly to our panelists, all right? ECHOS is an independent global innovation laboratory driven by design and we are divided in 3 different business units: School of Design Thinking, Innovation Projects, and Ventures. At Innovation Projects, we help businesses create value and innovate for good. At the School of Design Thinking, we help people and organizations master innovation mindset, skills, and tools. We are present in 3 different countries. We have offices in Brazil, in Portugal, and Australia. And we have had more than 100,000 professionals joining our courses, either in campus or online. And we have more than 150 projects developed. We're also proud to be part of the Global Design Thinking Alliance, a group of academic institutions that are dedicated to develop and research design thinking in the world. So we're starting, as you know, on July the 12th, this design leadership program, which is made of 12 global live masterclasses that are going to be taught by different design leaders around the globe, plus 12 regional live practices. These are workshops that are going to also be led by professional designers, where you're going to have the chance to practice design, talk about leadership, and share experiences with your peers. So we're having this global network starting on July the 12th. If you want to learn more about the program, you can access the website schoolofdesignthinking.ecos.cc/design leadership. So we have more information about the program, the participants, and the dates as well. Oops, sorry, just a second, come back to the slide presentation here. So I'm going to interrupt and start again because it keeps clicking on the website. Just a second. So in the meantime, you can check the website.
So great to see all of these wonderful faces here pop up. Thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Okay. Here it is. All right. So as I was saying, it's a 12-week program. So you're going to watch different leaders talking about themes like leadership, listening deeply, giving feedback, and other important themes related to the world of design. So it's a global track. And for the 12 masterclasses, you're going to have 12 different leaders from different organizations and different parts of the world, plus regional tracks, one for Americas that we are representing here today, another one for Brazil, and another one for Asia Pacific and Africa and Middle East. So we have all these beautiful faces representing the program, leading workshops in different themes. So you can expect to have lots of experiences and, of course, failures as well, because it's important for us to hear where people have failed and learn from their mistakes. So enough of me talking. Now it's time for our panelists to talk and share their experiences. And in order to warm up, I'm going to bring this quotation by Bruce Mau, one great designer that we love, and he was part of our podcast Desired. You can listen to the episode on Spotify if you wish. So about design leadership, Bruce Mau says, to lead is to envision the future and then systematically work to realize the vision. That is exactly what designers at their best are doing every day. Leadership and design are both processes of social influence that aim to manifest a vision of what is possible. So without further ado, Nadine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Reynaldo, and thank you for that overview of the program, which is very exciting and starting and today, right? You might have mentioned. So very exciting to be part of that and part of this conversation today. Just a quick note going back to why I moved towards this field of design leadership and why I decided to become an ambassador with ECOS and also regional leader, which is kind of some of the things I spoke towards earlier. So I've always found myself at the intersection of more of the internally facing with the external. So kind of the more of the organizational strategy and management along with project work and client management. And then also that combination of big picture thinking and detailed execution. So I'm constantly zooming in and out, and I've discovered that to be my kind of creative problem solving process. But with all of that, I've really found my place in design and my voice through design, in having critical conversations like this, really to help me continuously grow as a designer by not just creating things and talking about creating things, but then also really acknowledging the immense potential of design that it has on all parts of our life, really. And with that, with this opportunity also comes a responsibility. And so as designers, and especially as designers who are looking to become leaders in their field or are already leaders in their field, we really have the responsibility to question how we design and how we may lead through design. So today's topic, which is what is the role of design in leading organizational change and innovation, really speaks to that. And within that topic, we'll be looking at things like how can design help shepherd positive change within organizations? What is design's version of leadership? What is its unique value proposition? So those are some of those topics, but we'll be diving into lots more as we'll be having this conversation. And yeah, as you know, we've invited some brilliant thought leaders here today to really speak towards these topics and more. And I have the privilege to be asking questions and like you listening in and learning from them, because this is what I get most excited about, to really, ensure that we have these conversations and that we can build on each other. And so yeah, the three folks we have with us today, George A., Melanie, Kahl, and Koji Pereira. Thank you all for being here today. And I invited them here to bring a diversity in perspective, given each individual's backgrounds and experiences. So it's, acknowledging that design, whether it's definition, its application, then also the dynamics of design in of itself varies greatly across different professional settings. So whether you're based in an organization that is a nonprofit or a social enterprise or a for-profit, but then also the size of the organization, your place within the organization. So whether you are in-house, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a freelancer, all of those things and more, I won't list them all, really makes a difference in how design is defined, applied, and then practiced. And what might your role be and what might your impact be within that? So I will leave it at that because I want to give us lots of time for the conversation. So I will turn it over to our panelists to share a little bit about themselves and perhaps speak a little bit towards how each of them kind of leans into this topic. But we will, of course, dive more into that as well in our conversation. So George, Melanie, Koji, whoever wants to jump in first, go for it.
I think I heard my name first, so I'll just go. I am George A. I'm the co-founder and director of innovation at Greater Good Studio. We're based here in Chicago. I've been part of this team in a leadership role for the last 10 years because we're about to hit our 10-year anniversary. And I'll be speaking sort of from my perspective as someone who is working within a small independent consultancy or in social innovation.
I'll be the sandwich because I'm the woman, but I also kind of share backgrounds with both George and Koji, which is exciting. My name's Melanie. I'm usually based in Brooklyn. I've worked at the intersection of design, social innovation, and organizational change for the last 13 years. And I have the privilege of representing both the tech perspective, was most recently at a large tech company, working on their community and social impact programs and seeing how that interfaced with how they built products to serve those communities and how people use those products to change the communities that they served, which was really interesting. And then before that, worked at a firm called Dahlberg Design, which worked on service design and strategy for some of the bigger organizations as well as community organizations, working to make the world a healthier place where people can flourish. So I can speak to both that. One angle that I'll also bring in is both design studios I've worked with in the past were intrapreneurial studios. So small studios built within larger practices. And there's kind of an inherent organizational change dynamic when that happens as well. So happy to speak to that internal bit. Koji, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. Right, my name is Koji Pereira. I am head of design for Lyft business team. Before Lyft, I was at Google. So, pretty much my career is in tech. I'm actually in between jobs right now. I'm joining Twitter next month, and I'm very excited. Well, this month, I guess. And what else can I say? In terms of organization change, to me, the part that I care the most, I moved to US 7 years ago, and I am originally from Brazil. So being a Latinx person in tech industry, it's really isolating in some sense. There is not many people that have the same background as me here in Bay Area. And to me, one of the things that I've been focused on is the diversity, inclusion, and equity side, and just trying to understand how we can make our organizations more inclusive, have more diverse voices, and all of that. That's it.
Thank you all. So let's dive into the conversation. And George, I would like for you to perhaps take this first one. Feel free to adjust it to how you would like to show up to this and respond to this. But the question is, how do you communicate the value of design within your own organization or other organizations? And build on to that is, how might design be uniquely positioned to break from traditional models of leadership? So slightly different questions, but kind of building on each other. And feel free again to answer how you like.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the hardest one to start with. But I think it's challenging because it's hard for me to think about leadership without thinking about the leaders that I've been learning from, both the good and the bad practices that I've soaked up. Because when you're amongst design leadership in any particular place, anywhere I've ever worked, I've seen particular behaviors being modeled in front of me that is essentially implying this is what you need to do in order to be a leader here. And that implicit rule set, I think, is a lot more powerful than any sort of employee manual. And I think those behaviors tend to be the thing that then get replicated, because you implied this is a behavior that works here. And so therefore it's hard to not feel like, what are those imprints that are in me when I think about those leaders that I've worked under? And to what degree am I able to discern when I do behavior that is seen of me in my role as a leader now, how much of them is just me copying the cycle, regardless of how problematic it might be, versus am I critically aware of the behavior that I'm doing? A lot of it's automatic. I think what's kind of troubling and a little unsettling for me is just how autonomic, almost like a reflexive behavior, and whether that is to try to encourage someone to be themselves more, to encourage them, sort of inspire themselves to be a little further along than where they are, or to inspire them, or perhaps even to be fairly cruel. I'm completely capable of both of those ends because I've seen it all. So it's very challenging for me to sort of talk about it without recognizing all those things are still in me. And I don't know of a leader who hasn't seen some of that already in them. I don't hear a lot of conversation about it, but I know it's that trauma and those experiences are in me right now. And, to a degree, maybe to the other question around what is maybe unique, I think that there's something really beautiful about how design has a process for handling ambiguity, maybe better than most, and perhaps to a degree, is that maybe what's left, one of the remaining things, because almost every other aspect of our design process can be replicated and is probably fairly intuitive. But I think with all the other like big boy professions of engineering, law, and medicine, even business, there's such, it's like people have practically had ambiguity beaten out of them by the time they become professionals. That I think we're one of the few remaining professions where we still embrace it, face it head on, and have processes to work our way through it. It's pretty special, and I feel like that's one of the things that I would love to retain, and be able to promote, to let people know like we can be a great complement to those where ambiguity is an anathema. Like we work really well up front, and then perhaps before a thesis has been developed, we can help you with that thesis development. Then we work alongside those with thesis affirmation or like confirmation, clinical trial, all of that sort of like very rigorous processes. Go for it. But I'd like to contribute in a way that is about this upfront, so that we don't end up wasting, could be years, testing something that was the wrong theory in the first place. So that's a long-winded way of answering that really hard question. Thanks, Nadine.
That was perfect. Thank you, George. Thanks for sharing that. And Melanie and Koji, anything you would like to add to that? Anything you want to build on?
A couple of things. I think George is right, holding space for that ambiguity. And I think our opportunity now is not just to do that, but do that in a way that is safe and healthy and really harnesses a truly equitable collective imagination. I feel like we've learned a lot in the past. This is our moment to get better at that space holding for that collective imagination and navigating that ambiguity, get together, making sure the right voices are brought into the table. I often say that when I was working with a bunch of different teams, I used to work way back in the day in architecture and urban planning, and doing the design research and community engagement in those processes. I always said design is the spine. Our process can be a spine where a lot of people can play in that sandbox, but we have to architect that process to some degree. We have to harness the emergent nature of it, as well as have process and methods for doing it. But then we also have to make it a safe place for people to come and play in that sandbox, and make sure that the ideas that come out of that play and that exploration and that rigor are honored in the design. And I think that's where we're getting better. And that's where we need to, in order to continue to communicate the value of design, up our ability to both partner to do that well or become better at it ourselves as designers.
Yeah, another aspect that I'd like to add is from what George said, one of the things that I feel designers are very good at is the storytelling. And when you are jumping in an organization, very often the organization doesn't have or have trouble trying to articulate the vision for its product or for the organization itself. So I think designers and the design organization can help to articulate that and create a vision that will help the whole organization to move towards one specific North Star. And I've seen that working in practice in the past with the teams that I joined. So I feel like this is something we can definitely like make a difference and it's a different way to lead, I would say, because usually leaders will be very good at words and will like have answers for, not everything, but for the good questions. But as designers, we can actually solidify that vision and illustrate what that future could be.
Yes, all around. Thank you. And actually, a perfect segue into the question on how do we invite people into this conversation. So not to jump it back to you, Koji, because I know you just spoke towards some of that, but maybe just to build on that a little more. And then also, how do you build creative capacity in others conducive to innovation? So really like, speaking towards that space that you were all kind of speaking towards. But how do you actually do that? How have you done that in your experience as, in within the company, but then also, within your teaching, because I know you also teach and you're very passionate about that. So how do you create that space for conversation and creative capacity?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I see like two ways to do this, or two layers. One layer is the practical layer. What are the tools? What are the things that we can do together in order to achieve a vision, for instance, or to articulate a North Star? And that can be done with workshops, facilitation, design sprints. I think there's many tools for that. The other level to me is more related to the culture. What are the things that you are trying to instill in the culture of the company in order to make people feel like they can collaborate and they can participate? And when we talk about culture, I think it's, specifically about participation. I think we need to talk about inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity, because first of all, when we talk about tech, specifically, that's my area, but I'm pretty sure that applies to pretty much every single area, is that you need to have diverse voices in order to build a product that works for everyone. Because otherwise, if you think about it, this problem actually happens very often. We see a lot of products that work very well here in Silicon Valley, but then when we go to, I don't know, Midwest, or even if we go outside US, that product is like, what? Nobody really wants to use this. This doesn't make sense. Do people actually understand it, or do people can interact with this button that doesn't look like a button, right? All of these questions can't be solved if you don't have a diverse group of people sharing that background, sharing their perspectives and way of thinking when you're building a new product. And there is like a lot of research proving that it's not just like me saying this. So I have, we have a lot of examples where products were actually very successful if you have a very diverse group of people working on that. So you have to think about that. Okay, now how do you do that? One is hiring very diverse group of people and making sure that you're not biased towards it one way, which I think is very common. If you have a leader who is white guy, male, heteronormative, then that person will probably hire another tech bro. Like, how do you actually start breaking that thing? It's probably, first of all, hiring leaders that are diverse and making sure that even within our diversity in the leadership, we are not only hiring people that look like us. So I think that's the bottom of the funnel. Then you have to think about inclusion, right? And I think that's actually harder, because once you have people who are diverse, then you have people who maybe have different culture and think in a different way. For instance, I posted something yesterday about this. I was joining a workshop and reading this book called Cultural Map. And there's one interesting thing that says, US, it's very individual centric culture. So people here very often like promoting themselves, talking about their accomplishments. Whereas if you think about Latin America and Brazil, we're very community based, right? Like, how do you actually, how can I say, think about these people in a way that they can collaborate and they can contribute to your culture, but in a different way, because they are not exactly the same type of contributions that you might expect to have. So having that sensibility and putting together structures that will allow people to be themselves and do the best of that they can within their different cultures, within their different perspectives, is the best way to be really inclusive and making sure that everybody is listened to. And that sometimes means that, maybe someone is not the best as presenting slides. Maybe there's other ways to do that. Maybe it's like writing things, or maybe is via running a workshop, for instance, so on and so forth. So the cultural aspect is actually harder than the practical aspect, which is pretty much just applying some of the frameworks that we all know, and they're very effective too. And I think they are great ways to just like experiment and start to build this culture over time. But the culture takes time and it is very hard. So it's very important to have a leadership team that is very aware of all of this biases and intricacies that we see in different cultures.
Thanks for sharing that, Koji. Yeah, and I mean, I'm hearing lots of things here, and culture, of course, what does culture mean? And you mentioned Brazil, which of course is a different country, but we have so many cultures within the US, within an organization, within what we might think as a cohesive group of people. There's so many different cultures, and people show up in so many different ways. So I love that you spoke towards how do we create that space through the mindset, first of all, right, of leadership, to acknowledge that those differences exist, but then to really see those as opportunities to identify, where do people really shine? How can you best support them in order to also, support the organization? Like it all goes hand in hand. So thanks for sharing that. Anything to share from George and Melanie?
Thank you, Koji. I was thinking a lot about how, to some degree, navigating sort of work culture can, to a degree, be about what to do best to conform and contort yourself to fit with the leaders that exist, as opposed to another conversation around how do we change those leaders to think differently about their own behavior. And I bring this up because there is such a default distribution of power that creates enormous asymmetry that I'm somewhat aware of, but I can't ever really know to what degree I'm aware of the power I have, because people work, we have contracts, we have employees. And I'm struck by this, there's a quote a friend of mine gave me, and I can't tell exactly how to attribute it to them, but I think they heard it as well. But this thing that described culture was so striking to me, that culture was defined by the worst behavior of your top performers. So I am a top performer at my company. I of course I am. And by doing so, the stuff that I do, my worst behaviors are definitive. They set a new low bar and I get away with it. That's very unsettling. But I also know I've worked in many places where the top performers that I've worked for and their worst behaviors were just part of the package. So, a culture that is inclusive, I think has to understand that tension and the paradox of having worked in places where those behaviors are allowed and are given a pass. I don't think they should be, but tend to be because of how power is distributed within those organizations. So when I think about culture and I think about design, the inclusivity that we're describing has to include a lens of power to be put on top of it. Because when someone is trying to thrive and have their career grow, we have to think about how are we doing that, because there's a good chance there's a lot of new leaders that are emerging that they can tell if they have a chance of becoming a leader there. Like there's no like matrix they have to fill out. There's no questionnaire. You can intuitively tell. And I've worked in places where I could tell I'm never going to get on this track. I can't see myself in this leadership. And the behaviors I see are not representative of what I want to do. So how do we create, as leaders on this call, are we okay with creating cultures that allow for diverse leadership models that don't include us? Like if we are really truly leaders, we have to be okay of letting go of some of the fragility that comes with our egos in the position of power that we have. I'm not totally sure if I'm ready yet. I like saying it out loud because I'm going to try to convince myself maybe I can one day. But like, wouldn't that be a model of leadership where I'm okay with not becoming that one, where I can gracefully let go of the power I got given? I mean, that's nuts. I'm not ready yet. But I would hope that, because in the places I've worked, I just couldn't see a path for me. So I ended up having to leave and make my own thing. It shouldn't take that. shouldn't have to make your own bloody company just to find your own model for leadership. Jesus, that seems like too high of a bar. So how do we foster multiple pathways, multiple definitions for leadership within the cultures we have that aren't simply a coddling of the leaders that we currently have? And I know a lot of places I know do that.
1000%, 1000%. I think that's so important, and so important to know that also the worst behavior of your best leaders. Also, there's a flip side to that I see in a lot of studios, and something I've been exploring a bit in my future looking practice is, as much as the worst behavior can help define of the top leaders, the unseen best and unrecognized and undervalued best behaviors of caretaking, of supporting, and whatnot are often undervalued. And so there's a flip side of that. When you don't see those things being valued and uplifted in a design studio, rewarded, seen as a requirement for that next level, right? Putting others before self, taking care of folks who are stepping into maybe a stretch position, then that's also kind of the flip side of that. And so I wonder how, as design leaders too, we can attune ourselves, Koji, with your pushing to of diversity and inclusion, to recognize the diversity of multiple intelligences, the diversity of the ways in which we support people, the diversity in which those come to bear in teams. Because I also think culture is defined by what we don't see and by what we don't uplift. And so how can we be better anthropologists and then amplifiers of the bright spots in our culture and the things that truly make, truly collective imaginative design is risky. What do you need for risk? Well, we know from surveys from Google, it's psychological safety. We know from mediation, it's mutual understanding, it's trust. And so I think that baseline, those two powerful things together with that lens of diversity is going to be setting the stage for those new studios and new practices.
You're killing it, Melanie. That's fantastic. I feel like just the idea of the top and tail end, you could hold a lot of places, but by those two defining measures, they're not things you can measure like a KPI, but you can feel it for sure. Yeah. And I think that within those two bookends, a lot of people can find themselves harmed, but also can thrive. And I think that the thing that I've often seen is cultures where, heaven forbid, we put some structure in, because if we do, we might limit some designers' capacity to be thoughtful. When actually that kind of normative sort of tone setting has allowed, unfortunately, a lot of problematic behavior to go on in places, because then it tends to default to social currency being a pathway for leadership, as opposed to these like defined and qualitative behaviors that I think we probably want to promote. So when we think about leadership, I do wonder, like, well, what are the defining behaviors, like observable behaviors, that we want to see versus just simply a result? Because if a result is, I got this project, I landed this quarter, I got this type of profit margin, there's a lot of really probably very toxic ways to get those results that are the behaviors we don't want to see. But because we asked a question in that particular way, we kind of gloss over those behaviors that got us there. It's a little bit like, I don't know enough about education, so maybe I'm in dodgy ground here, but like, isn't there a way of doing evaluations of students to know if they've learned something? Please demonstrate how you have done this behavior. They have modeled a comprehension of the reading material. They can articulate why this protagonist did this action. Like, this modeled and demonstrable behaviors that are measurable and detectable. Isn't that what we should be doing? Isn't that something we could use as part of a leadership model, as opposed to simply we set a vision and by whatever cost we get there? That just seems a little clumsy.
Yeah, and I love Koji, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add that this is a long conversation. I don't think we are there yet in terms of, yes, we have the solution here. We just need to apply it, that's for sure. But one of the things that I thought it was very positive in my time at Lyft was with Audrey Liu as our VP, we're able to actually look at the pathways and include some of those behaviors that George mentioned in the pathways, meaning that if you want to be a senior designer, then you not only have to have a great design craft, but you actually have to listen to others very well, help other people to be better at that skills, coach other designers. So there's an aspect of like helping each other, which is actually one of the principles of Lyft that we try to include in the pathways. And again, I don't think it's perfect, but I think as soon as we start to think about pathways and how you evolve in your career as something that it's not only about the work you do, about the product you deliver, but also about the culture that you're building and how you actually help people around you, I think we're definitely making some progress.
And I'm curious, Koji, how do you bring that into your teaching? How do you create some of that we've been speaking towards in your teaching?
Yeah, it's funny because I was a individual contributor for a good amount of time at Google, and I was in parallel teaching interaction design in the second interaction design program that existed in Brazil. And I always loved to have this feeling of like helping people to grow in their careers. Some people would reach out to me later and say, hey, remember that class in 2000 something? I learned this and really changed my mind. Thank you so much. I always felt that sensation of helping people very gratefully, something that made me feel very grateful. And at some point I was like, okay, maybe I should go back and be a full-time teacher. Then I look at the reality of living in the Bay Area, being a teacher, not very, doesn't seem like something that it's going to be sustainable for me. But then I talked with my manager and she said, well, maybe you should try to go to the manager path, because I think you can actually help people to grow. And of course, it won't be only that. You're going to have very boring meetings. You're going to have a lot of politics to deal with. But I feel like you're going to be a good mentor, a good manager, and a good coach. So I tried that and I really liked and enjoyed. And since that, I just feel like this is definitely the thing that I want to continue to do in my life. So for people who are individual contributors, I feel like, yes, there is a huge part of being a manager, especially on the tech side, that it's not very fun at all. But at the same time, you get to do things that, you do have the power and you do have a good position in a company where you can really make a difference and you can help people. In my case, specifically looking at the inclusion and diversity lens, I feel like there's a lot to be done. And again, yes, we're very in initial steps right now, but I'm happy to see that I can actually, help to build that future.
Thank you, Koji. And with a note towards action, right? So we're talking about creating that mindset, ensuring we are in the space, we are thinking about these things. But then of course, design has the bias towards action. It's all about, doing things in a safe space, but, kind of testing theories early. And yeah, not just thinking about things, but actually doing them. So with that, I would like to hear a little bit from Melanie in terms of how might we design the actual design process to help with organizational change. There's a whole bigger question I was going to ask, but it's pretty complex. So I'm going to leave it as a simple question and let you do what you'd like with it in terms of speaking towards that.
I think the first thing is, I think designers and design leaders or facilitators of design is just like raising our change intelligence and understanding, there's a lot in vogue for a while about individual behavioral science. I saw that kind of permeate tech, but I often saw a gap in our understanding about how change happens at a more organizational level, or at a community level in terms of how to build trust and how some of those things we learn about behavioral science may incentivize and get larger. And something that has been threaded through this conversation in little ways is building trust and moving from design as transaction to design as trust. And so when you start to flip your understanding of, okay, not just a design process so I can produce the thing, the object, whether that's an actual product or whether it's a service, to how can I build the capacity and environment around not only building the right thing, but building the teams and the trust and the energy to make this thing happen. How do I do that? It changes the decisions you make around the design process. And I think that consultants so people who are kind of toggle and are outsiders looking in can play a role in this, but also internal designers can do. You kind of have different challenges depending on where you sit as a consultant or in-house designer in this, but thinking about the design process as a way to build trust and build connection and expand your perspectives as a designer is a great way to start. And then thinking about how do you build not just the logical buy-in. So oftentimes we think of the design process as a series of also decision makings. It's where that double diamond gets uncomfortable, right? When we have to narrow, how can we make those decision points be points where we also build momentum, emotional buy-in, and trust? And if you think of those moments as ways where you can, I often as a designer think of those as designed experiences. How can I design the experience around this, not just to get the insights or get to the decision or get to that outcome, but create a culture, a little microculture around that process that it usually leads to more sustainable results. It also usually leads to more innovation, right? Because people are connecting with each other and each other's ideas in new ways. And so a couple takeaways from there is like, get change curious, learn a bit about how behavior change happens beyond an organization. Design the design process. So think about it, not just getting what you need as the design team, but what the culture, the community, the tech, whatever context you're designing in, what they need to make it happen. And then designing the design experiences within that to build those perspectives. It's a bit of like the additional lens that I think as leaders, we have the opportunity to step into that. I think when you're doing one piece of that design, in the design process, you don't get as much. But as a leader in the design process and as a way to push this field forward, I think we have to be intrigued just as much with the process as we are the products, because that's where cultures are going to change. And ultimately, society can change, right? When we start to practice in the way that we imagine we can be in the future.
Thank you, Melanie. And we are actually moving into Q&A, unless George or Koji, you had anything pressing you wanted to share or build on?
Just affirming what Melanie said. That was wonderfully put. Thank you.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from Kayla, who I actually work with at Desklight. So great to see you in here, and thank you for the question. So she's asking, as you all develop as design leaders, how do you all go about sharing your knowledge with staff or teams you are working with? And I'll just kind of open that up to whoever would like to take that question.
I just wanted to mention that there's a mental model I've been having in my studio of late. The idea of trying to make it as porous as possible. As in, what are the ways in which we can get the people that I know that are in my network that I've met recently or have been inspired by, and have them have access to our team, have our team have access to them, and also ways in which our team individually are getting their own exposure for panels, for talks, for writing their own thought pieces on our company Medium page. I want there to be as much porosity as possible, even to the point whereby if they need to get poached from our team because of how awesome they are, then I think that's success. So like to coddle them and to kind of keep them in this like insulated bubble is mostly what I've experienced. And I've always found it to be a little weird. Whereas I think if the opposite were true, to make it very porous, to let ideas come in and out as much as I can, I think it's kind of healthy for our culture. So I don't know if that's exactly what perhaps the question was asking, but I feel like that's how I'm thinking about how am I sharing what I'm learning, because what I often learn is like, wow, this is an amazing person I didn't even know existed. How do I get my team to now know about them? Like the group that probably that struck me the most recently is called the Disableist. It's two individuals, Liz Jackson and Alex Hargard. Just every time I speak to them, I feel like I'm witnessing like a mini TED talk. They're just incredible. And I feel like it's just we've asked for the help and consulting on a couple of projects that we're doing, but I want to get more of their brilliance in front of our team. And that's happening kind of a little more frequently now, but that porosity is a thing that I'm thinking about when I think about the question.
Love that, George. And I have to say, George's push to letting other people put their thoughts in the world, or not just having someone ghost write and put your name on it. I mean, a design leader a decade ago, I was a co-author as opposed to a ghost written on a few fast co pieces, and that totally changed the trajectory of the way that my career works. So that kind of generosity is good. In that role, I was called the knowledge manager of our studio, which is an interesting role, having someone be a learning person of your studio, but I always hated the word. So we talk about how do you share what you're learning. Knowledge manager was like, oh, knowledge feels very static. It's nouns, knowledge that I manage, I keep in line. And I always shifted and described my role as my goal is to cultivate a learning culture within our education design studio. At that time, I was working in education. And I actually reverted back to, we were designing for schools and campuses. I reverted to what I knew best, which was teaching. My mom was a teacher and whatnot, and honestly, show and tell and field trips. So how can you make more, when we think about porousness, it's also about making more visible. So even something as simple as like keeping books on your desk open that spark conversations, that have a Post-it note in it and leaving them out. If you're going somewhere on a field trip, can you bring someone along with you, or can you take your studio with you on that field trip rather than you going there and then coming back and giving the information? How can you bring those experiences in and then cultivate that process of it? I even did, when I left Dahlberg Design, I left a lending library and I put a letter in each of the 5 books that I think really informed the way I practiced as much, that I thought were really important. I always was referencing with people, and then invited other people to build that lending library, because there's a native culture, and this is a little bit macabre, but like when somebody dies, a library dies, right? When somebody in a native culture dies, they often say, well, a library has burned. I think the same thing happens in studios. Somebody leaves and they bring the knowledge, not just where the files are, but they bring the perspectives. So how can you leave artifacts of your worldview or learning that help create that culture of learning, right? Rather than trying to manage the static pieces of that learning. And so I just build on in that way.
It's such a beautiful and powerful visual. Thanks for sharing that, Melanie, in terms of the artifacts. I'm really picturing that. Yeah. Koji, do you have anything pressing to add? Otherwise, I would love to jump to the next question, but feel free, let me know.
Yeah, just something quick. For me, to kind of share my knowledge as a leader, to me is more about like, as a leader, I like to see myself in the back seat and kind of like elevate my people to have the opportunities to present themselves as leaders too. So, and I think when we think about product design, there's basically 2 ways to do that. One is being an individual contributor that will grow into like principal designer, or be a manager. So in both cases, I think it's important to make sure that they have the opportunity to start to deal with some of the roles that a manager or a principal designer will have in the future, and kind of find the opportunities for them to do their best work in that area.
Thank you, Koji. And Reynaldo, do we have time for one more question? I know we have some brilliant questions here in the chat, so I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but we'll see how we can answer those kind of async offline. But what are you thinking, Ray? Should we?
Okay, pick one and then we have a last round and then we say goodbye. How about that?
Okay, you're so kind. Thank you. And those of you who need to jump off, of course, feel free to. Question from Carrie. So on the flip side of the bad behavior of high performers, how do you think that design leaders can think differently about low performers who need coaching and redirection, especially when the leader is trying not to replicate negative or harsh feedback culture?
That's such a great question. I feel like the
Lots
challenge
of
is,
thinking.
yeah, the challenge is come in trying to determine maybe what's best for this individual. I feel like there's a teaching model in here somewhere that is different than maybe professional development paths, just to have this individual maybe describe for themselves what they think is going to be best. To a degree, I think understanding what the work is ahead of them certainly would be helpful. But I think that there's a lot of cultural norms that are probably in play as well. So having direct discussions about what is their objectives and goals for themselves, what do they believe they would learn from, who can they be connected to, either guided or mentored or just be in community with, and what other sort of like network resources can be made available. I'm not totally sure the phrase low performing. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways in which that could be determined. But I can see the people struggling for sure. And I think one of the challenges is often is a culture that we're working with, still making sure that people who are on one end of a spectrum not getting lost, versus dedicating all of our time towards those quote unquote top performers. I've certainly recognized places that are single swim, which is a phrase that I've used to stay with pride, and I realize now how cruel it is. I don't know what else to describe it as. Whereas as opposed to like, why aren't we thinking about all these individuals in this pool, given floaties, given guidance, given swimming lessons if need be, as opposed to like this literal life or death type metaphor. And in some cases, it can be quite as dramatic as that. Some people are like just ruined by those experiences. And from what I can tell, when they didn't swim, when they end up sinking, they blame themselves. So I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it to have a culture where you end up leaving thinking I'm terrible. Maybe we just failed you. Like, how much did this culture fail you and what you needed? I think there has to be some accounting for that. But right now it's all kind of skewed towards this swim level, as opposed to, why can't we make this water more buoyant? Like, what is going on? Why are we failing them? So I don't totally know how to answer this question, but I feel like that there's like a reframe in here that I'm struggling to articulate.
Yeah, and I think that was such a critical, good question to bring in there and to speak towards as we're wrapping up here. So sorry to cut this a little short, but I do want to bounce it back to Reynaldo as he has a little more to share to close us out here. But thank you from my end to, of course, all of the brilliant panelists here. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts, for being vulnerable with us today as well. And then, of course, to all of you who are joining and listening in and sharing your questions and your time with us. Thank you so much. Reynaldo, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Nadine. Thank you, George. Thank you, Koji and Melanie. It was such a great conversation. Folks, unfortunately, this is the end, but you can have more at the Design Leadership program, as I said at the beginning. So don't go away, because I have a few gifts for you coming up. So the program starts on July the 12th, as I said, with 12 masterclasses plus 12 workshops led by these wonderful designers in this America's track. So don't forget to check the website. The sessions on Mondays are at 7 p.m. New York time. They are live, or you can watch them recorded later if you prefer, and they last between 90 to 120 minutes. And the Americas workshops, they run every Wednesday at 8 p.m. New York time, and they are 3-hour sessions, very practical, and you get your hands dirty. So we have this special 20% off code. So you can use the hashtag or simply scan this QR code. And if you have more questions about the program or anything, you can talk to Luna. Luna is in the room here with us today, so she can assist you with anything that you may need. So here is her email, and you can write to her as well. And there is a free gift for you. You can download our ebook, What is Design Leadership, with loads of contributions, and you can read about this and get ready for the program that is coming up. So this is all for now. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. Hope to see you in the program. Bye-bye.